Why am I being stopped? Because you match the description. That's what a black trauma surgeon heard while standing beside his own vehicle outside a medical complex after finishing a 14-hour shift. Minutes later, he was face down on the pavement, handcuffed in front of patients and hospital staff, while officers searched his car for evidence of a crime they still couldn't clearly explain. Months later, the city agreed to pay $500,000 to settle the lawsuit. And according to the complaint, the most disturbing part wasn't just the stop itself. It was the fact that officers reportedly ignored repeated proof of who he was while continuing to escalate anyway. So the question becomes, was this proactive policing or a case of suspicion turning into discrimination? This is one of those incidents where the legal questions are complicated, but the body cam footage made public made reaction immediate. Every video here could save you from a serious mistake one day. Subscribe now so you don't miss what could protect you. Then share this video and drop your opinion below. I want to hear what you think. Dr. Marcus Ellison was a 42-year-old trauma surgeon working at a regional medical center in a large metropolitan area. Colleagues described him as calm, highly respected, and known for staying late during emergency cases. On the night this incident happened, he had just completed an extended surgical shift involving multiple emergency patients. It was late, close to midnight. Dr. Ellison walked out of the hospital still wearing scrubs beneath a jacket and carrying a medical bag. He headed toward his vehicle parked in a nearby structure routinely used by hospital staff. According to the lawsuit later filed against the city, he initially believed the officers approaching him were investigating something nearby. There had reportedly been police activity in the area earlier that evening involving vehicle break-ins. But within seconds, it became clear the officers were focused on him. One officer reportedly told him he was acting suspicious near the garage. Now, this is important. The parking structure was one he used regularly. His hospital ID was visible, and security records later showed he had batch swiped into the building earlier that evening. But in the moment, none of that seemed to matter. Body cam footage reportedly begins with an officer exiting a patrol vehicle and immediately issuing commands. "Sir, step away from the car." Dr. Ellison pauses. "What's going on?" "Step away from the vehicle now." According to witnesses, the surgeon complied almost immediately, raising his hand slightly while trying to understand why he was being stopped. "I work here," he says. "Keep your hands where I can see them." At first, the interaction looks tense but manageable, the kind of investigative stop officers conduct every day. But here's where things changed. One officer allegedly claimed Dr. Ellison kept reaching toward his waistband. The lawsuit disputes that entirely, arguing the footage showed no aggressive movement and no visible threat. Then the officers asked for identification. Dr. Ellison reportedly informed them his wallet was inside the vehicle. "Don't reach for anything," one officer snapped. At that point, confusion starts building on both sides. The surgeon appears frustrated but controlled. "You stopped me for no reason." "Sir, you're being detained." "Detained for what?" "Possible burglary activity." And that moment matters because legally, those words carry weight. In many states, officers can briefly detain someone if they have reasonable suspicion that criminal activity may be occurring. That standard is lower than probable cause. Officers do not need proof beyond doubt during an investigative stop. But they do need specific articulable facts, not just a vague feeling, not just "he looks suspicious." A court may look at things like time of night, behavior, location, matching suspect descriptions, evasive conduct, or reports of recent crimes nearby. The key legal question often becomes whether the officer can clearly explain why the detention was necessary in the first place. And according to the lawsuit filed later, that explanation became increasingly difficult here. Dr. Ellison reportedly asked multiple times what description he matched. Officers allegedly never gave a clear answer. One officer claimed there had been recent car break-ins involving a black male in dark clothing.
That description, according to critics afterward, was so broad that it could potentially apply to countless people leaving work at night. Now, generally speaking, race alone cannot legally justify a stop. Courts have repeatedly held that broad racial descriptions without additional identifying information can create serious constitutional concerns. But officers are also given considerable discretion during fast-moving encounters, and this is where officer discretion matters. Police are trained to investigate suspicious circumstances before crimes occur, not after. The problem is that discretion can become dangerous if assumptions replace evidence. At this point in the footage, Dr. Ellison appears visibly irritated, and honestly, many viewers probably would be too. He reportedly tells officers, "I'm a surgeon, I just got off work." One officer responds, "That doesn't mean anything right now." Seconds later, the situation escalates dramatically. Another officer moves toward Dr. Ellison and grabs his arm. "Turn around." "For what?" "Turn around now." The surgeon hesitates briefly, not physically resisting according to the complaint, but verbally questioning the detention. That hesitation becomes the turning point. Officers force him toward the hood of the vehicle. "You're resisting." "I'm not resisting." The body cam audio reportedly captures nearby hospital employees yelling that he works here. Someone can reportedly be heard saying, "He saved my son's life." But the officers continue handcuffing him. And this is the moment that exploded online once footage became public. Not because officers conducted a stop, but because many viewers believe the officers ignored mounting evidence that they had the wrong person. At this point, the legal issue shifts from reasonable suspicion into something deeper: escalation and use of force during detention. Generally, officers are allowed to use reasonable force to control a detention if they believe a subject is resisting or refusing commands. But courts also examine proportionality. Was the force necessary? Did the subject pose a threat? Were officers escalating because of actual danger or because they were losing control of the interaction? Those questions become especially important when the original basis for the stop appears weak. Another major issue involves searches. According to the lawsuit, officers searched portions of Dr. Ellison's vehicle after detaining him. The city later argued officers were conducting a lawful protective sweep because they believed tools related to vehicle theft might be present. But the complaint argued there was no probable cause supporting a deeper search. Now, vehicle searches are one of the most misunderstood parts of constitutional law. In many situations, police can search a vehicle without a warrant under specific exceptions, including probable cause, officer safety concerns, consent, or inventory procedures after impoundment. But those exceptions still have limits. A generalized suspicion usually is not enough by itself, and importantly, even when an action may technically fall within legal authority, departments still have policies requiring professionalism, de-escalation, and bias-free policing. That distinction matters because legality and good judgment are not always the same thing. Did the officers have authority to approach and investigate? Maybe. Late-night reports of vehicle break-ins can absolutely justify police presence and investigative stops under certain circumstances. But having authority does not automatically mean the decision was wise, ethical, or necessary. The biggest issue here appears to be escalation. Once Dr. Ellison identified himself, once hospital staff began corroborating his story, once no evidence of criminal activity appeared, that should have changed the temperature of the interaction. Instead, according to critics, officers doubled down. And that's often where public trust breaks down in these cases. Not at the beginning. At the moment officers are given an opportunity to reassess and choose not to. At the same time, it's also fair to acknowledge that roadside encounters can become unpredictable quickly. Officers are trained to maintain command presence because hesitation during dangerous situations can get people hurt. But the standard is not perfection. The standard is reasonable. And many viewers who watched this footage concluded the response stopped being reasonable long before the handcuffs came off. There's also a broader issue here that departments across the country continue struggling with. What exactly qualifies as suspicious? Because when that standard becomes too vague, it creates enormous room for bias, whether intentional or unconscious. And once someone feels targeted unfairly, cooperation often collapses, making escalation even more likely. That cycle damages everyone involved. For viewers watching this situation unfold, the final lesson is not that police stops are automatically unlawful, and it's not that every officer acts with bad intent. The lesson is that calm decision-making matters on both sides. If you are stopped, remain calm. Do not physically resist even if you believe the stop is unfair. Ask whether you are being detained or free to leave. Document the interaction afterward if possible. And if questioning becomes serious, ask for a lawyer rather than arguing on the roadside. Because courts exist to challenge unlawful conduct. The street is not the place where those disputes get resolved safely.